Egypt's economy has recorded a growth of 2% in the second quarter of the fiscal year 2020 and 2021. That's as most sectors in the economy witnessed a rebound in activity. Now, authorities there say GDP is set to continue expanding at 2.8% and 5.3% in the third and fourth quarters, respectively. From Cairo, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
Egypt's economy managed to contain the COVID-19 induced shocks due to its diversified economy and recorded a growth rate of 2.5% in 2020. The positive trend is expected to continue in the second half of the 2020-2021 fiscal year, as the North African state's economy reopens following the pandemic slowdown.
The reform program of 2016 managed to develop several sectors such as chemicals, petroleum products and natural gas. All these sectors gave a boost to the state budget. The Egyptian government launched a program to support exports, and a lot of financing was pumped into the sectors, which provided financial incentives to exporters. These therefore became competitive internationally in several industries such as agriculture. There is a theory which states when exports increase, unemployment drops and growth rates go up.
Egypt's planning minister Hala Said says the GDP growth rate in the first half of the fiscal year, July to December 2020, was 1.35% compared to 5.6% a year earlier. She forecasts GDP growth will climb in the last quarter of 2021 to reach 5.3%.
Egypt concentrated on expanding the natural gas and petroleum sectors, which generated revenue that helped upgrade other sectors such as investments. We have seen government investments jump by an unprecedented 38%. We find that private sector investments have increased. We've also found huge investments in infrastructure projects and large growth in the tech industry. The tech industry is going to be leading the country's economic growth rates very soon.
However, experts say a major drop in foreign currency inflow from sectors such as tourism and trade due to the virus curbs still poses a major challenge. But there are hopes this will improve in the second half of 2021 as the vaccination rollout campaigns across the world start to accelerate. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's discuss Africa's economic future further. We're joined by Michael Sudar-Kassa. He's the CEO of Africa Business Group. Great to have you on the show with us, Michael. Now, as we just mentioned, according to AFDB data, 30 million were pushed into extreme poverty in 2020. A further 39 million could be there this year. And that's if they don't get the appropriate support in light of the pandemic. So even as the AFDB says that Africa's economy is projected to rebound, what are the realities on the ground?
Well, I think the African Development Bank has summed it up quite well. I mean, the countries of the continent really have taken a socioeconomic blow from the global closure and the global slowdown from an economic standpoint that was brought upon by COVID. I think the plus is that the continent has not had the same kind of shock from a public healthcare standpoint. So as the world starts getting vaccines and the economies start turning, Africa can stand to benefit from trade, stand to benefit potentially from investment. I mean, one of the things that happened in 2020 was that the global investors didn't put as much money. A lot of money was put to work, but it's almost like the global financiers are flush with capital. And so Africa presents itself as a potential home, given the population growth, given the fact that the economies, although they slowed down, it was really
Well, certainly looks like we lost Michael there. We'll try get him back. Oh, looks like we got him back. Well, Michael, on that note, you were just talking about financing for Africa's economies. Now, the AFDB does estimate that governments in Africa needed additional financing of about $154 billion in 2020 in order to respond to the crisis better. What's your take on whether Africa was able to get the support that it needed? Where has that left us today? Are we any better for it? And given that we're seeing governments still struggling to service their debt, how are we solving that financing question?
Well, there's a big challenge because African countries were able to mobilize support, principally in the form of debt, but that has raised the debt levels of the countries of the continent to very perilous levels. And increasingly, the debt is commercial debt as opposed to OEC debt, the formal, the way that we principally used to borrow before. So there are some headwinds coming in terms of managing debt, without question. I think some of the things that will help the continent, again, is diasporans who are off the continent. As those economies get vaccinated in the US and Europe, remittance flows will pick back up. Remittances, if you recall, are always almost equal to or greater than overseas development aid. So the downturn in remittances that happened last year was also one of the factors that led into the poor performance. That will pick up. Also, Africa stands to benefit from investment going into 2021, 2022, as the economies here rebound, because we've been less hit from a healthcare standpoint than many other parts of the world. So I think that, the prognosis was, it was very bad. I think that there's opportunity for a rebound on the continent because of the fact that from a health standpoint, we've weathered the storm fairly well. I think key sectors that are critical, travel and tourism. We had a lot of our airlines really take a blow, but if those can be stabilized, there is kind of pent up demand for travel from off the continent onto the continent and within the continent. And then that drives the MICE industry, the tourism industry, which are low hanging fruit because the infrastructure is there. We just really need to make it easier for travel. So vaccines will be needed on the continent. That's a key area of focus that our governments should focus on and development partners should focus on, making sure that it's safe to travel and less painful from the standpoint of all the structures that were put in place from a healthcare standpoint for people to travel around the continent. And then by the fourth quarter, early next year, I think we will be doing much better.
Right. And the FDB report actually pointed to two key areas. They said an effective rollout of vaccines on the continent and, of course, the full implementation of that Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. They said those two could tilt the risks to the upside. Now, looking at the realities of the vaccine rollout in Africa right now, and, of course, the progress of that trade agreement which just kicked off this January, are you confident that we are heading somewhere positive in these areas?
Yes, and concern. My concern is about the vaccine rollout because it's happening slower than anywhere else in the world. One is still not clear by the third quarter where exactly we'll be. I think that as the vaccine rollouts go, to some degree, our rebound will go. From the standpoint of the Trade Act, I think it has stimulated a lot of interest in the continent. And from off the continent, interested in what a kind of one market would look like for 1.3, 1.4 billion people. So again, as I mentioned, if we can stabilize our airlines and we can stabilize from the health standpoint, travel on the continent, that will have a very catalytic effect. So I definitely agree with the bank that those two areas are key. And lastly, also, there's an opportunity, I think, for export. Now, one of the key markets that is doing well in the world now is the China market. And China has long been an increasingly important buyer of African goods. So China can play a big role as an offtake partner, I think, also in stimulating growth on the continent.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for that insightful conversation. We do have to leave it there. That, of course, is Michael Sudar Kassa. He's the CEO of Africa Business Group.